At 6 in the morning, under a concrete highway overpass on the edge of Portland, Oregon, there's frost on the grass, frost on the shopping carts, frost on the tents. And parked between two pillars, there's a small white box on bicycle wheels, about 7 feet long, shaped a little like a loaf of bread. Inside that box, a 61-year-old veteran we'll call Ray is waking up warm and dry in a real sleeping bag, on a real foam mattress, behind a door that locks from the inside. The entire structure around him cost about $150 to build. And for the first time in 4 years, Ray slept through the night. That little white box is a bike camper. And across America, in Seattle and Denver and Eugene and a dozen other cities, volunteers are building them in garages and church parking lots and handing them to people who have nothing. This video is about what it's actually like to live inside one, not the feel-good headline version. The real version, with the cold mornings and the police knocks and the small, stubborn moments of dignity that $150 of plywood can buy. So what is this thing exactly? Picture a bicycle trailer, the kind parents tow kids around in, but stretched and enclosed. The most famous design comes from a retired builder in Washington state named Paul Elkins, who spent years refining a camper made mostly out of coroplast, the corrugated plastic that political yard signs are made of. It's the same material, just in big 4x8 sheets. It's waterproof, it's surprisingly strong, and a sheet costs less than a pizza. The frame is thin plywood and a few strips of lumber. The floor sits on a salvaged bicycle trailer or a welded frame with 2 wheels. Add foam board insulation, a scavenged window, a piano hinge for the door, and some paint, and you have a shelter that weighs around 60 pounds and can be towed behind an ordinary bicycle. Inside, there's room for a sleeping platform, a shelf for food and clothes, hooks for a lantern, and in the better builds, a tiny fold-down counter with a single-burner camp stove. Some have a small vent in the roof. Some have solar panels the size of a hardcover book, enough to charge a phone. It's smaller than a prison cell. Nobody pretends otherwise. But it has the 3 things a tent will never have: hard walls, wheels, and a lock. To understand why anyone would live in one, you have to understand the math these campers were built to answer. On any given night in America, somewhere around 750,000 people have no home. Shelters, in most cities, are full, and many of the people outside won't use them anyway because shelters can mean theft, bedbugs, curfews, and being separated from a spouse or a dog. So people live in tents, and tents get destroyed. City crews sweep encampments and everything a person owns, medications, birth certificates, family photos, goes into a garbage truck. People live in cars, and the cars get towed for unpaid registration, and with the car goes the last roof they had. A bike camper slips through the cracks in that system, and that's exactly the point. Since it doesn't sit on land as a structure, it's much harder to bulldoze. Since it has no motor, there's no registration, no insurance, no gas, and no impound lot waiting to swallow it. When the knock comes and someone says you can't stay here, you don't lose your home. You pedal your home somewhere else. So let's live a day in one. Ray's alarm is the traffic overhead. By 7, he's rolled up the sleeping bag, folded the platform, and turned his bedroom into a hallway barely wide enough to turn around in. The first job of every morning is the same job: move. The unwritten rule among bike camper riders is that you never stay in one spot long enough to become a fixture, because fixtures attract complaints, and complaints attract officers. So Ray tows his house 2 miles across town, past the Willamette River, to a quiet industrial street where nobody looks twice before noon. The second job is water. A public library, a park spigot, a gas station bathroom, a church that leaves its outdoor tap on. Riders keep a mental map of every reliable faucet in a 5-mile radius, the way you know the way to your own kitchen. 2-gallon jugs ride in milk crates strapped beside the wheels. Water for drinking, water for washing, water for the one pot that cooks everything. Breakfast happens on the fold-down counter, a single burner, a can of butane, oatmeal, or eggs when there are eggs. And this is the part that surprises people who've never been homeless. Cooking your own food, even oatmeal, even on a camp stove bolted to a plywood shelf, feels completely different than standing in a soup line. One rider in Eugene put it this way: "In the line, someone feeds you. In the camper you make breakfast, same calories, different man." The middle of the day is errands that take 4 times longer than they should. A trip to the clinic is an hour of pedaling. Charging a phone means 2 hours in a library chair. Everything is slower when your house weighs 60 pounds and follows you everywhere. But it does follow you, and that changes the biggest daily fear of street life. Ray doesn't have to choose between going to a doctor's appointment and guarding his belongings, because his belongings are locked inside a hard-walled box that he parks where he can see it through the clinic window. There's also something nobody plans for when they design these campers, and it might matter as much as the walls. The riders find each other. In Portland, 3 or 4 campers will quietly cluster on the same industrial street, close enough to hear a shout, far enough apart not to draw a crowd. One rider watches the campers while 2 others make the water run. Somebody's stove becomes the coffee stove. An older woman the other riders know as Dee, who has towed her camper through 2 Oregon winters, keeps a spare tube and a patch kit, and has fixed more flat tires for other riders than she can count. "Out in the tents," she says, "everybody guarded their own pile. Out here we've got something worth defending together." Homelessness is famously lonely, and loneliness kills slower than the cold, but just as surely. A cluster of bike campers, it turns out, isn't just shelter. It's the beginning of a neighborhood. Then the sun goes down, and the camper has to do its real job. A winter night in the Pacific Northwest hovers just above freezing, with rain that goes sideways. Inside the camper, 1/2 inch of foam board insulation and 1 human body do something remarkable. Riders report the inside temperature running 20, sometimes 30 degrees warmer than the air outside. No heater, no flame, just trapped body heat in a small, sealed space. A candle lantern adds a few degrees more and a little yellow light to read by. The rain on the coroplast roof sounds like rain on a tent, but the difference is that it stays outside. The sleeping bag stays dry, and dry in December is the whole game. Hypothermia doesn't need dramatic cold to kill somebody. It needs wet clothes, wind, and a long night, and it finds hundreds of homeless people every single year. There's a science to sleeping in one of these. Crack the vent, or your breath condenses on the ceiling and rains back down on you by morning. Park with the door facing a wall so nobody can stand in front of it without you hearing footsteps. Keep your shoes inside because shoes left outside a camper disappear. And that lock, a simple barrel bolt that costs $2 at any hardware store, might be the most important piece of the entire build. Because here's what 4 years of sleeping outside does to a human being. You never fully sleep. Some part of your brain stays posted at the door of the tent all night, listening, because tents get slashed, and sleeping people get robbed, and sometimes worse. Sleep researchers have a name for the wreckage this causes, and anyone who has lived it just calls it the fog. Memory slipping, tempers shortening, days blurring. Now put that same person behind hard walls and a locked door. Riders describe the first night in a camper the same way, over and over. I slept. That's it. That's the miracle. I slept. And everything that comes after homelessness starts with sleep. You cannot sit through a housing appointment, hold a day labor job, or fill out benefits paperwork on 4 broken hours a night. Caseworkers in Eugene noticed something about the people who got hard-sided shelters, whether campers or the tiny sleeping pods that some cities build. They started showing up, to appointments, to job interviews, to the pharmacy, not because anything about their situation was fixed, but because for the first time in years, their brains were getting enough rest to fight for their own future. So who's building these things? Mostly, it's people you'd never expect. Paul Elkins gave his plans away. publishing them online for a few dollars and demonstrating the build in videos that have been watched by millions. And the plans traveled. A retired machinist in Denver builds 2 campers a winter in his garage and gives them away through a local church. A high school shop class in Michigan built one as a semester project and donated it to a veterans outreach group. Church congregations run weekend build events, 20 volunteers, 4 campers, sausages on a grill in the parking lot, and by Sunday night, 4 people are sleeping indoors, if you can call it indoors, for the first time in years. Ask the builders why bikes, why not tiny houses, and they'll tell you the ugly truth about tiny houses. A tiny house needs land, and land needs permits, and permits need zoning hearings, and zoning hearings need neighbors to say yes, and neighbors say no. A tiny house village can take 5 years and $1 million to open. A bike camper takes a weekend and the cost of a dinner for 2 at a chain restaurant, and it needs permission from absolutely no one. One builder in Seattle keeps a stack of coroplast sheets in his garage the way other men keep firewood. His line is simple: I can't fix homelessness. I can fix Tuesday night for one guy, and then next month, another guy. If this story is landing with you, there's a good chance it's because it's not abstract for you. Maybe money is tighter than anyone around you knows. Maybe you're a paycheck or a diagnosis away from the edge yourself, or someone you love already went over it. I put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint, and I'll be straight with you about why it exists. There are things I can't do justice to in a video like this. Specific step-by-step strategies for staying housed, staying safe, and rebuilding from nothing that need more room and more detail than any video allows. So they live in the blueprint instead. It was written for 3 kinds of people. People who are close to the edge and can still be pulled back. People who are already out there tonight. And people who want to actually help someone who is, instead of just worrying about them. The link is in the description below, first line. If that's you, or someone you love, go get it after this video. Now, back under the overpass, because there's a part of this life we haven't talked about yet, and it usually arrives at 2 in the morning. The knock. Knuckles on coroplast sound like knuckles on a drum, and every rider knows the sound. Sometimes it's an officer, polite, tired, telling you the business owner complained and you've got to move along. Sometimes it's a parks employee at dawn. Sometimes it's just a stranger testing whether anyone's inside. The law, in most cities, honestly doesn't know what a bike camper is. The motor code has no box for it. The building code has no box for it. And calling it camping equipment doesn't quite fit either. Riders live inside that confusion. In some cities, the confusion protects them because there's no clean ordinance to cite them under. In others, officers reach for whatever fits, obstructing a sidewalk, camping in a park after hours, and the ticket lands on someone with no address to mail it to and no money to pay it. Recent years have made it harder. In 2024, the Supreme Court's decision in a case out of Grants Pass, Oregon, gave cities much wider power to ticket and arrest people for sleeping outside, even when there are no shelter beds available. Cities across the West responded with new bans and bigger sweeps. And in that climate, the wheels under a bike camper stopped being a convenience and became the whole survival strategy. You can't sweep what already moved. Riders in some cities now rotate between 5 or 6 overnight spots on a schedule, the way a chess player protects a king. It is exhausting. It is also, for thousands of people, working. Then there's the weather at the extremes, and this is where the campers earn their keep or fail trying. Real winter, the kind that hits Denver or Minneapolis, pushes a basic build past its limits. Riders in cold cities double the foam board, stuff the wall cavities with reflective insulation, and skirt the wheels so wind can't pull heat out from under the floor. A single tea light candle in a metal lantern, riders swear, can hold a small camper above freezing on a 15-degree night. It's still dangerous. Carbon monoxide doesn't care how good your intentions are. which is why experienced riders drill vent holes high and low and never, ever run a propane heater while sleeping. People have died learning that lesson in cars and campers alike. One rider in Denver, a former long-haul trucker who goes by Marcus, survived a stretch of nights near zero with a system that sounds almost military. 2 sleeping bags nested inside each other, a wool blanket under the mattress instead of over him, because the cold comes up through the floor before it comes through the walls, hot water in a steel bottle at his feet, and a wind check on the whole camper every night before dark. He'd walk 1 slow lap around it, pressing on seams, taping anything that whistled. He learned that in a truck cab, he says, and the truck cab was luxury compared to this. But the principle travels. Cold doesn't beat you all at once. It beats you through the one gap you didn't check. Summer flips the problem. A sealed plastic box in July sun becomes an oven, so Southern riders paint the roofs white, park in shade like their lives depend on it, because they do, and prop both vents wide. The camper becomes a bedroom for the dark hours only, and the day is lived outside it. Now, it's time to be honest about what these campers are not, because the criticism is real, and some of it is fair. A bike camper has no toilet, no shower, no refrigerator, no heat you'd recognize as heat. It doesn't treat the untreated diabetes, or the PTSD, or the addiction that put many riders outside in the first place. Housing advocates worry, reasonably, that if the public sees homeless people tucked into tidy little pods, the pressure to build actual housing evaporates, and a temporary patch quietly becomes the permanent plan. City officials worry about safety, about fire, about encampments on wheels. Nobody serious, including the builders themselves, calls this a solution. The builders call it a bridge. And the case for the bridge is brutally simple. Permanent housing takes years to build, and winter takes 1 night to kill. Whatever gets a human being through the years in between, alive, rested, and holding on to their documents and their dignity, buys time for the real fix. A $150 camper is not a home. It's a raft. And you don't criticize a raft for not being a harbor. Which brings this story back to Ray, because Ray's story is the reason these campers matter. Ray is a veteran. He served in the Army in the 1980s, worked 30 years as a warehouse foreman, and lost the thread the way so many older Americans do. A layoff at 56, then a heart problem, then the savings, then the apartment. Veterans are heavily overrepresented among the homeless. Tens of thousands of them on the streets on any given night. Men and women who once had a bunk, a schedule, and a mission, and now have a sleeping bag and a sweep notice. Ray spent 4 years in tents. 3 times everything he owned went into a city garbage truck, including, once, his discharge papers. And if you've ever tried to claim veterans' benefits without your paperwork, you know that losing those documents can cost a man years. Then, a church group handed him a white Coroplast camper with a barrel bolt on the door. Inside it, his papers stayed dry in a plastic tub. His medications stayed where he left them. His brain, finally sleeping, started working again. Within 8 months, Ray had replaced his documents, connected with a veterans housing program, and gotten on a waiting list that he could actually keep track of, because he had somewhere to keep the letters. Ray saved himself. The camper just gave him a locked door to do it behind. The volunteers who build these things have a saying, and it holds the whole idea in one sentence. Nobody climbs out of a hole while they're still falling. The camper doesn't lift anyone out, it just stops the fall. So tomorrow morning, under that overpass in Portland, the frost will come back, and the traffic will start up. And inside a 7-foot box that costs less than a car payment, a man will wake up warm, slide back a $2 bolt, and step out to move his house across town one more time. It isn't much, and to the person inside, it's everything. Because the distance between despair and a plan turns out to be about 7 feet long, 60 pounds, and 1 good night of sleep. If any part of this story felt close to home, for you or for somebody you love, The Veteran's Blueprint is waiting in the first link of the description. Go get it before you close this video. It's the most useful thing I can hand you. And if stories like this one matter to you, stories about ordinary people quietly refusing to give up on each other, subscribe, because there are more of them out there than the news will ever tell you.